when the Mary Celeste was found abandoned 400 miles east of the Azores. For 150 years, theories ranging from sea monsters to alien abductions have tried to explain what happened to Captain Briggs, his family, and his crew. The truth, however, might be more logical and more tragic than the sensational legends that have captured our imagination for over a century. The ghost ship discovered. What would compel an experienced captain and his entire crew to abandon a perfectly seaworthy vessel in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? This question has puzzled maritime historians, casual observers, and conspiracy theorists alike for a century and a half. The morning of December 4, 1872 began routinely enough for Captain David Morehouse and the crew of the British brig Dei Grazia. They were 13 days into their voyage from New York to Gibraltar, making steady progress across the Atlantic despite the winter weather. At approximately 1 p.m., the ship's lookout spotted something unusual through his spyglass. Another vessel about 6 miles distant, sailing erratically. The ship appeared to be under sail but moving in an unusual manner, yawing and veering off course as if no hand guided her helm. Captain Morehouse, an experienced mariner familiar with most vessels on this Atlantic route, recognized the distant ship as the Mary Celeste, a merchant vessel he knew should have departed New York 8 days before his own departure. Concerned by the strange behavior of the vessel, Morehouse altered course to investigate. As the Dei Grazia drew closer, the crew hailed the Mary Celeste repeatedly. Their calls echoed across the water without response. No figures appeared on deck. No movement could be detected. The 103-foot brigantine simply drifted, her sails partially set but in disarray, suggesting no one had tended them for some time. Captain Morehouse made the decision to send a boarding party to investigate. First Mate Oliver DeVoe led the small team across in a rowboat, climbing aboard the silent vessel to discover what maritime historian Charles Eddie Fay would later call the most famous ghost ship in maritime history. The scene that greeted DeVoe and his men was profoundly unsettling precisely because of how ordinary it appeared. The Mary Celeste was in excellent sailing condition with a sound hull and no significant damage. The cargo hold contained 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol bound for Genoa, Italy, all apparently intact except for 9 empty barrels. Most striking to the boarding party was the complete absence of any human presence. All 10 people who had departed New York aboard the Mary Celeste, Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members, had vanished without trace. Yet there were no signs of violence, struggle, or panic that might explain their departure. The ship's single lifeboat was missing, apparently removed deliberately rather than washed away by storms. This suggested a planned evacuation rather than a sudden catastrophe. The ship's chronometer and sextant, essential navigation instruments, were also missing, while other valuable items remained untouched. In the captain's cabin, DeVoe found Captain Briggs' belongings in order. His navigational instruments were gone, but his personal items remained undisturbed. The ship's logbook was still present, though the slate used for daily course calculations was empty. The final log entry from November 25th, 9 days earlier, noted the Mary Celeste's position as approaching the eastern edge of the Azores. It contained no hint of trouble or distress. Throughout the vessel, the boarding party found evidence of an orderly but hasty departure. The crew's sea chests remained packed with their possessions. Their waterproof boots still stood lined up, suggesting they hadn't expected to leave the ship permanently. 6 months' worth of food and water supplies remained in the galley. One of the most telling discoveries was a sounding rod found on deck, a tool typically used to measure the depth of water in the hold or check the contents of cargo barrels. Its presence on the main deck, rather than in its storage location, suggested someone had been using it shortly before the abandonment. After confirming no one remained aboard, First Mate DeVoe returned to the Dei Grazia to report his findings. The Mary Celeste stood before them like a floating riddle, intact yet abandoned, sailing yet crewless, adrift in a vast ocean of unanswered questions. The two ships were approximately 400 nautical miles east of the Azores, hundreds of miles from the nearest land in an era before radio communication or modern rescue capabilities. Captain Morehouse faced a difficult decision. Maritime law obligated him to assist vessels in distress, but this situation was unprecedented. With no crew to rescue and his own schedule to maintain, he could have noted the position of the drifting ship and continued on his way. Instead, recognizing the value of the vessel and its cargo, Morehouse divided his crew, sending First Mate DeVoe and 2 sailors back aboard the Mary Celeste to sail her to Gibraltar, where they could claim salvage rights. For 10 days, the 2 vessels sailed in tandem across the Atlantic, finally reaching Gibraltar on December 13, 1872. Upon arrival, Morehouse reported the unusual discovery to British authorities, triggering what would become one of the most famous maritime investigations in history. News of the ghost ship spread quickly. The Mary Celeste had departed New York Harbor on November 7th with a full crew and captain's family aboard. Just 4 weeks later, she arrived in Gibraltar without a soul to explain what had transpired in the interim. What happened to 10 people, including a small child, who apparently left a perfectly sound vessel in the middle of the Atlantic? If they departed by choice, what danger seemed so immediate that Captain Briggs would risk his family and crew in a small lifeboat far from land? If they encountered violence, why were there no signs of struggle? If the abandonment resulted from panic, why was it executed with such apparent order? The subsequent investigation would attempt to answer these questions, yet more than a century later, the Mary Celeste remains one of maritime history's most enduring mysteries. The facts we know for certain are few, and they exist in stark contrast to the many fantastic theories that would emerge in the decades following the discovery. To understand why the mystery of the Mary Celeste continues to capture our imagination, we must first understand who was aboard this vessel during its final, fateful voyage. Captain Benjamin Briggs was not a reckless adventurer, but a cautious, religious family man with an impeccable safety record. Why would such a man make the decision to abandon ship? And why would he bring his wife and young daughter on what would become history's most infamous ghost ship? The vanished crew. Why would a captain with an impeccable safety record bring his wife and young daughter on what would become history's most infamous ghost ship? This question becomes even more perplexing when we examine the character and reputation of Captain Benjamin Briggs. At 37 years old, Captain Briggs was regarded as one of the most capable mariners operating on the Atlantic trade routes. Born into a seafaring family from Massachusetts, he had followed his father and brothers into maritime life, quickly establishing himself as a skilled and prudent captain. Unlike the stereotype of rough-and-tumble sea captains, Briggs was a devout Christian, a family man who neither drank alcohol nor permitted profanity aboard his vessels. His reputation for caution and safety was well established among merchants and sailors alike. A fellow captain once remarked that, if Briggs felt a vessel unsafe, no sum of money could induce him to sail in her. Shipping agents frequently sought his services for valuable cargo, knowing his meticulous attention to detail would ensure safe delivery. Letters to his mother before the voyage revealed a man contemplating leaving the sea altogether. Briggs had written of his desire to establish a more stable life ashore, perhaps opening a store with his brother. Yet the opportunity to command and hold partial ownership in the Mary Celeste proved too financially promising to decline. He viewed this voyage as potentially one of his last before transitioning to life on land. His wife Sarah Elizabeth, described by contemporaries as intelligent and composed, had accompanied him on previous journeys. For the Mary Celeste voyage, they decided to bring their 2-year-old daughter Sophia along as well. Their 7-year-old son Arthur remained behind with relatives to continue his schooling, a decision that ultimately saved him from whatever fate befell the rest of his family. Captain Briggs selected his crew with characteristic care. His first mate, Albert G. Richardson, was an experienced sailor who had served with Briggs on previous voyages. The remaining crew consisted of second mate Andrew Gilling, 4 able seamen, Germans Volkert Lorenzen and Bors Lorenzen, and New Yorkers Arian Martins and Gottlieb Gaudskor, and ship's cook Edward William Head. All were experienced sailors with solid reputations, representing the typical multinational makeup of merchant